you've said a number of times publicly, many times publicly, and I think it's now been confirmed that CIA had knowledge of, at best, had knowledge of your uncle's assassination, knew things. It's still being hidden now. What do you think, and that's obviously true, what do you think the motive was in that killing?
Well, I think the people who were involved in it, the specific people who were involved in it were almost all associated with the Miami station, which was the largest CIA station at that time, and was basically, it was the Cuban station. And the people who were involved in that station were people like Bill Harvey and David Atlee Phillips, who was clearly involved in my uncle's assassination. He was, by all evidence, he was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler at the CIA. And then E. Howard Hunt, who made a confession, David Morales, who is the chief hitman. He ran the Operation Phoenix program in Vietnam. He killed 10,000 people, civilians over there, murdered them. And he also gave a confession of being in Dallas. And then there were most of the people were associated with Cuba, and the impetus came from that group of people who were angry at my uncle for not sending in air cover during the Bay of Pigs invasion, and then even more so after the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. My uncle then developed this friendship with Khrushchev, and he shut down all of the Cuban attacks by Alpha 66 and these other groups that were harassing Cuba. They were sinking ships, sinking Russian ships. They were operating flotillas out of South Florida and doing raids on, and my uncle and father sent the Coast Guard down to confiscate their boats and their weaponry and to arrest the ones that continued to do it. And those people, those individuals, were also, have been traced and tracked to the assassination, over the years. And they're now, there's been, there's millions of documents. I mean,
but why not release all the what doesn't make sense to me is why not just admit it now? I mean, no one you describe is still alive. There's no living person. Everybody
now, virtually.
So why wouldn't Biden declassify these documents?
I don't know why, and why would Trump not?
I agree. I know why Trump wouldn't, because he was convinced by Mike Pompeo not to. So, and it's not an excuse, but not,
Yeah, but we don't know what Mike Pompeo said to him.
No, but that's the point. What could possibly be
the law requires them to do it. So the JFK assassinations law required that all documents be released by 2017.
Yeah.
And yet they refused. So they.
But it suggests that there's something
about
big
4,000 of them that are left, and you have to assume. And again, I try not to talk about things that I cannot document.
Right.
But I think it's a fair assumption that they're not protecting individuals, that they're protecting some institutional interest.
What's the most powerful institution in American
life?
Well,
I don't know. So I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah,
but there must be something, because why wouldn't they just release it?
And by the way, for people, you and I having this conversation about who did the assassination, why they did it, a lot of that is the stuff that I've told you, and I've tried to stick to things that, that are documentable, and the names, et cetera. But for people who want a real, kind of a panoramic view of what happened, I think the best book that's been written about this is Jim Douglas's book, which is called The Unspeakable, because he's done something that, after the Warren Commission, that became the orthodoxy. And the New York Times and all the major news organizations have enforced that orthodoxy, and anybody who challenged that orthodoxy becomes a conspiracy theorist. And in fact, in 1967, the CIA sent a letter out to a telecom out to all of its Operation Mockingbird people, which are all the the assets it had in the American press, more than 400 people, editors, senior writers in the American press, saying, from now on, anybody who questions the single gunman theory of the Kennedy assassination should be characterized as a conspiracy theorist. So they didn't coin the word conspiracy theory, but they popularized it with that memo. They sent a memo out to all their stations saying that talk should be discouraged. So but what happened after that is then in 1979, the House Assassinations Committee met for a year and a half, and they looked at much more evidence than the Warren Commission did, including, Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles had run the Warren Commission. He was the head of the CIA who my uncle fired. When my uncle died, he said, I'm glad the little shit is dead. He thought he was a god. That's what he said to a young reporter. And then he becomes head of the commission that is, it shouldn't have been called the Warren Commission. It should be called the Dulles, because Earl Warren had a full-time job at the Supreme Court. All the other guys on the Warren Commission had full-time jobs as senator and congressman. The only guy who went to every meeting and, looked at every piece of evidence and developed the questions for the witnesses was Alan Dulles. He was running the entire Warren Commission. And he should have been the prime suspect in the crime. And he was communicating secretly with the people at the CIA, with David Atlee Phillips, with George Johannides, who was the CIA liaison, telling them what questions were going to be asked and what they should reveal, and with J. Edgar Hoover at the same time. Well, the whole thing was a coordinated kind of kabuki theater. But then Congress goes back and investigates it in '79. And Congress then comes back after a year and a half, seeing a lot more stuff, and says, and they conclude this was a conspiracy.
Yes.
So they make that official. So anybody who says it was just Lee Harvey Oswald is differing from the people who actually made the investigation.
So given
and
that,
most of the people on that staff who I've talked to believed that it was the CIA. And as you know, at that time, the dispute between them was the mob and the CIA, because there was a lot of mob involvement. Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, who was the Chicago boss, Santos Trafficante, who was the Tampa boss, and Carlos Marcello, who was the New Orleans boss, were all involved. And they all had casinos in Havana. And they were working with the CIA to assassinate Castro. So they had hitmen at their disposal, and they were training Cubans who were sharpshooters for Batista as hitmen. And I've talked to some of the hitmen. I've talked to Antonio Vecchiano, who was involved, and who was also David Atlee Phillips' handler. David Atlee Phillips was his handler, and he was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler. So Vecchiano met Oswald in Dallas I think in September of 1963. I've talked to the people who were actually working for the CIA and the mob at that time, to kill Castro, and how they were then pivoted to this. Some of them were pivoted to this new project.
You often hear people say the news is full of lies.
In Kennedy's motorcade,
239 people. The death of Jeffrey Epstein.